fun, and I will call it fun, that we have meeting like this is one, yes, we're all can be in our pajamas, bundled up if it's cold, or relaxed in your tank tops if you're in Florida and it's really warm. I mean, it is nice. We miss meeting in community, but we love the fact that we get to meet so casually and enjoy just like this, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. I know someone's driving, it's just to get that morning, that Sunday morning, boost of inspiration from like minds with like principles. I mean, that's why we do this. And we love to have this sharing afterwards. So we always have like someone speaking on a topic and a little reading, something very short, but we're not formal. And we love that about ourselves, that we're not formal. We really want to inspire each other to bring these principles and practices into our everyday life, so that it isn't just a Sunday thing, but on Sunday, we get to come together, ask questions, put forth ideas, support each other, ask for prayer, things that are really holding us down or bothering us. We get to join in together and uplift each other in community. And at the Center for Spiritual Living, Jacksonville, our vision is to bring alive these spiritual principles and practices that we speak about, to live them daily in our lives. And I think I said last week, we don't believe in heaven later, in something great or wonderful later. I mean, we do, but not that it's only later, that it's now. Heaven is available right here and now. Jesus spoke that the kingdom of heaven is within, and it is now in this moment. So we get to come together to experience that idea of heaven within right now. And that is that conscious awareness, that love and peace and joy is available to us right here, right now, and in every moment that follows. Meaning, no matter what is going on in your life, no matter what your relationships look like, no matter what your bank account looks like, no matter what the weather looks like, we know that there is that place within us that is paradise, or that kingdom of heaven.
Is practicing compassion with forgiveness. Compassion is from the Latin and Greek words to mean to suffer together. That compassion is a physical response to another's suffering. That being compassionate motivates us to relieve the suffering of another person. So to hear that kind of like in a trail, it's like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. So how do we practice compassion? Being compassionate to relieve another's suffering by forgiveness. It's kind of a trick question if you think about it for a minute. Why would my forgiveness relieve your suffering? Why would your forgiveness relieve my suffering? It may be a trick question, but the answer actually is really simple. By practicing forgiveness, it allows the healing of the original resentment that caused the suffering. Is that tracking? Hopefully that's making a little sense. It allows us to show up in the relationship differently going forward. The kicker to the question of forgiveness and why we do it is not for the other person, ever. It is for us. Think about it. Why would we drink the poison of hurt, anger, and resentment, even hate? Hate is a very strong word, and expect the other person to suffer. It's only us that suffers when we no longer choose love in any situation we find ourselves in. When we forget who and what we are, we suffer. We've all felt it, but we may not have understood it at the time. It would maybe manifested as a stomach ache or a raise in blood pressure when interacting around a certain person or situation. I mean, those are the physical reactions to the resentment, right? Conversely, unforgiveness is a guarantee that it will manifest itself eventually in physical sickness. Guaranteed without a doubt. At some point, it will manifest in physical sickness. Next question is an obvious one. How do we forgive? It's definitely a process. It can be quick for small things, or it can take years for much larger things. But the key here is to decide to do the work. Spiritual enlightenment or spiritual sobriety takes what it takes. There's no clock. There's no calendar. There's no deadline. There's only our decision, our willingness to do the work. To decide to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. We've all had those moments where it's like a big, like, oh, I am so tired of this. What do I have to do? What do I have to do to not feel this anymore? And 9 times out of 10, it's forgiveness work. I grew up the youngest daughter of 7 kids. My beautiful, beautiful sister is also on this call. And we were Irish Catholic right down to the front row of church and being bribed with donuts to behave in church. It's like, can you picture the scene? All of these children lined up in the front row of church. You know, everybody's all like, okay, if we don't get in trouble, if we manage to not misbehave, we'll get donuts after church. So, you know, inside that Catholicism and inside that programming, I have been taught how to be afraid and how to hold resentments and guilt and wield it like a sword. Like for a long time, I could that whole Irish guilt, you know, that Catholic guilt, it's powerful. It is so powerful, you know, and on the other side of that, you know, I can wear a super heavy cloak of victimhood at the same time. You know, to say that, oh, poor me, I've had all these things happen to me and I've had all this things in my life. And, you know, I'm just going to sit here in it and be a victim. You know, fast forward to sitting in the audience in middle school is when I was brought to Mile High Church in Denver, Colorado with Dr. Fred Vogt, one of the most powerful teachers of Science Mind and Centers for Spiritual Living that I have ever experienced since. He told me that God doesn't want me to be afraid. You know, that God isn't going to judge me and punish me for the things that I have done. In fact, when I heard the words that God is me, I was like, what? That's completely against everything I had ever been taught or said to me in my entire life up to that point. You know, do you mean to tell me, I'm like, even now I look back and I'm like, do you mean to tell me all these years that I've been thinking that there is a God outside of me, separate and judgmental is not the truth? Like, you know, those mind-blowing moments of awakening, you know, that God and I are one. And because we are one and we know that God is pure love, then by definition, I can also only be love. What? I mean, it's like, it's very disconcerting for a little while until you finally start accepting it and living it and making it a part of your day-to-day existence, that all of the heaviness starts to fall away. You know, those moments were for me moments of safety, moments of love, moments of acceptance and peace that, you know, I have fallen back on my entire life. You know, how do I release the victimhood, the guilt, and the anger? How do I get spiritually sober? So we talk about all this time. It's like, everybody's like, oh, you got to accept it. You got to let it go. You got to go. But many times there is not that practical application of what to do to release a lot of these things. And the funny part is I scan across the faces on my screen, and a lot of my friends are going to be like, this is an old talk. This is how Sherri talks all the time. So, you know, the bondage that the ego had around my heart for a long time, you know, it took this process to unravel it and to let my light really start to shine. You know, the Bible talks about, you know, putting the bushel over your light. I mean, that's what anger and fear and resentment does, is it builds that basket over your light. And you're like, why do I feel so heavy? Why do I feel so sad? Why do I feel so dark? It's like, that's why most of the time, you know. So when we start this process and we start doing the work, you know, and you identify the things that you want to let go, and you identify the things that you want to release, I highly recommend that if you feel it's too much or that you can't do it on your own, that you reach out to one of us, Reverend Elizabeth, Dieter, or myself, and really get serious about the process. You know, that's what we are trained to do. We are trained to help you without judgment, without, you know, keeping it within two people that you can trust. Is huge in this process of really digging into doing the work. We are trained to shed those layers that have weighed us down all of our lives and essentially bring each other home to the light. And it's a beautiful process when the work is done in that manner. There are rules, of course, about children and elders, you know, in these moments, but we won't get into those. But there is a multi-step process. If you were to come to me, we would share a multi-step process. And we would identify the things that no longer serve you. First, another beautiful set of words, a fearless moral inventory. This is what we would do. Beautiful, right? You would first identify who the perpetrator of the hurt was. It could be any person. It could be an institution. It could be a principle. It could be done directly to you or handed down from your family of origin. You know, we think about forgiveness always of people most of the time, but if we start doing the work and you start going through the things, there are multiple things. I mean, it could be other religions, it could be other races, it could be government institutions, it could be all kinds of things that have like built up over the years and handed down to us. You know, for example, you know, when we talk about the family of origin, my other beautiful sister started dating one of the sons of a family that, for my grandparents, I am not even sure what happened, had a big fight years and years and years and years and years and years and years ago. And she started dating one of the sons, and you would have thought she committed a mortal sin. It was like, what? She's dating, blah, 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 blah. And come to find out, he's actually very, very nice. And he's very, very good to my sister. And next year, they will have celebrated 50 years of marriage. It's like, and they're still madly in love. They're like two kids. It's hysterical to watch. You know, and those are the kind of things that kind of get handed down to us. And I'm sure if we pause for a minute and think about all the things that were handed to us that we had no business as children picking up, that we can still identify that we have carried all these years. So next, we would identify the cause of the hurt. What happened? You know, for many of us, this is the first time that these words are spoken out loud. You know, things happen to us and we internalize them, and we don't ever share them with another human being because we're afraid or we're ashamed, or, you know, we're just all weird. Like our trust, we don't trust the people around us that we can share this hurt and this feeling with. And again, that's why you would choose someone that you can trust to have these conversations with, and highly recommend not having the conversation with the person that you're having these problems with, to have someone that is completely outside of that circle to share this information with. And the healing that occurs when those words are said out loud, even the very first time, everything changes. The healing already begins when we release the words from our heart and from our consciousness and share them with another human. And that I've experienced it to the point where it brings you to tears just to have someone listen and to be that person to hear what's happened. Then you would identify what the effect is. For example, it could be financial, it could be self-esteem, it could be our, how we show up in the world. It would be, yeah. I mean, there even could be how I show up in all my relationships, in my sexual world. What is, as you track through these things, you'll come up with those conversations. From here, if there is a part that you played in this is the time where you would identify your part in it. Very often, when there are resentments or there are hurts or there is forgiveness work to be done, we also play a part in that. So it's very important to identify our part in that process. So whenever we talk about this part in the process, inevitably it comes up, what about all the things that happened to me when I was a child? And it's important for you to know that as a child, you played no part. Know that. Feel it, understand it, and know it. A very important person in my life that I respect highly, when this part came up, I was at a conference and this part came up, and everybody, you can see the hackles come up. You can see, the energy kind of change in the room when this was talked about because of the children issues. And her words to the group, and I will never forget them, and I share them at every point that I can, that your part is hanging on to it for all this time. That is your part in whatever that is that happened as children. So it's like, well, I thought I had it out, but apparently I don't. So back to the work, right? You repeat this for every single thing you've been carrying around in your heart all your life. I know, it's a lot. It's a lot. We've all been around the block a few times, and we all have had different experiences, and we've all done all this thing. But this is the important part. This is where the magic is. Shedding the layers and feelings make you feel physically lighter, more open, more joyous, more compassionate. Some of this can be tricky, but know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if you don't work through these, you will never be able to feel true compassion, ever. It will eat your lunch for the rest of your life. I know it because I fed it for a long, long time. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So now let's go back to the list of people, institutions, and principles that you are making to forgive. We are leaving no stone unturned. Remember, we decided that we were entirely ready to do the work, right? So who's on this list? Moms, dads, exes, siblings, teachers, bosses, co-workers, governments, races, other religion, everything. I mean, this is like the scroll unrolling, right? It's getting to be a big list when the work is done. No wonder we have ulcers. We can't sleep. We can't keep a relationship. All my friends are toxic and angry. Do I eat or drink excessively because we're trying to cover up these resentments? They are like splinters that are trying to work their way out of us. When we choose a spiritual path and we start this awakening, all of these things that have been wedged in these different places start working their way up, and they are literally splinters, because we'll do some work and we'll remove a layer and we'll be like, okay, I'm good. We'll have a little bit of peace and quiet, and then suddenly there'll be something that happens that upheaves a whole nother layer that we didn't even know was there. So this is part of the process, and it's okay, and it's good. Just know that this is a good thing. It doesn't feel so good sometimes. It definitely does not feel so good, but I promise that it's good. So the next question, the last question, is how about you? Where are you on the list? When do you get forgiven? When do you get to feel better? We're encouraged to start this list. Reverend Elizabeth, the reading that she said was like, forgiveness starts with us. Forgiveness starts with me, and I have to forgive me before I can do any of the other forgiveness work. And that's the hardest one of all, because the promise of this work is peace. The promise of this work is joy and compassion and empathy and all those beautiful words that we hear. And if you hear the words and they are kind of like, oh, I don't feel that. Well, I don't see that. Be willing to do the work, and I guarantee you those feelings will come. When you remember that you are a human having a spiritual experience. And you can say it any way you want. You can have a spiritual being having a human experience. We're all having the same experience on different levels. When you decide that everyone around you is doing the best they can at the moment, including you, that even justifiable anger, we've all got them. It's like, well, I can forgive A, B, and C, but there is no way in heck that I'm gonna let go of F and G. No way. Eventually, it's exhausting and ultimately poison. When you decide to drop the rope and never pick it up again and choose love, is when you'll get to be forgiven on yourself. And you get to forgive yourself. Don't pick up the rope anymore. There are multiple smiles on the screen right now, because that is my go-to when friends come and they're talking about things. It's like, sounded like you picked up the rope. I'm like, oh, you said it again. So, remembering self-love first. From there, we get to see the spiritual experience in everyone else. Inside the Science of Mind textbook, there is a section, page 427 to 482, that talks about the teachings of Jesus. Knowing going into this section in the textbook, and I'm going to read from page 457, that talks about divine forgiveness from Matthew 18, chapter 18, paragraph 21 and 22. But know going into this section that Ernest Holmes acknowledged Jesus as one of the greatest teachers to ever walk the face of the earth. And that God is not separate from us. It is us. And that God is all there is, and there is nothing else. Right? So know those statements going into this section. And I encourage everyone to spend some time in this section of the textbook. When I was very intimidated by the textbook for a very long time, because it can be very dense and it can be very heavy. So what I've done is I've taken the textbook and put it on my iPad so I can search it. You know, when I'm thinking of things like what I did for this, I was writing my talk on forgiveness. I searched forgiveness in my iPad, and it shows me all the times in the textbook that forgiveness shows up. So it's super helpful, you know, and I also use it more as a reference book. It does not resonate with me as a page turner. You know, there are some certain sections that are super dense, but it's much better for me as a page turner. So on page 457 with divine forgiveness, it says, in the next passage, Jesus clearly explains the meaning of divine forgiveness. He says that we should forgive until 70 times 7, but this is another way of saying that forgiveness is eternal and ever available. What a load is dropped from the shoulders of personal responsibility when we realize that the eternal mind holds not against anyone. It's like, there's no more judgment. There's no more fear. There's none of that weight anymore that comes with that realization. So at this point, you know, we cannot expect others to treat us with respect, compassion, and love if we are not ourselves respectful, compassionate, and loving. We don't lose anything by helping others. We all gain when we decide to practice the spiritual principles of gratitude, listening, openness, surrender, faith and trust, but most of all, forgiveness. Adding deep spiritual practices will help create better open lines of communication, honesty, sincerity, and integrity, both individually and communally. When we do that, we can really go further together. Thank you.